A hidden chamber, dust-choked air. Then, the manuscripts. Not scripture, but symbols writhing like trapped insects. We found them buried deep, breathing ancient secrets into the quiet mosque. And with every word deciphered, every shadowed glyph revealed, a cold presence began to stir. Something else was listening, something ancient, and it was waking up. Karim Hassan ran a gloved hand over the flaking calligraphy on the ancient wall, his breath misting slightly in the cool, still air of the Al-Nur Mosque. Years of dust, neglect, and the patient erosion of time had blurred the intricate patterns, softened the sharp lines of the mihrab. But Karim, lead architect for the restoration project, saw beyond the decay. He saw the whispers of history, the devout hands that had once carved these verses, the countless prayers that had resonated within these hallowed stones for nearly 9 centuries. It was a sacred duty, this restoration, a meticulous dance with the past, breathing life back into crumbling beauty. His team, a mix of seasoned masons, young apprentices, and art historians, moved with practiced reverence. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, limestone dust, and a faint, indefinable musk that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the building. Today, they were addressing a persistent structural weakness behind the mihrab, a section that had long puzzled previous conservators. It wasn't a crack, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the stone, as if a section of the wall had been subtly, yet deliberately, separated from its brethren. "Careful with that chisel, Abdul," Karim instructed a young apprentice, whose eagerness sometimes outpaced his precision. "Every piece tells a story." Abdul nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. Not a structural flaw, but a deception. A cleverly concealed recess, camouflaged by a thin layer of stone cut to perfectly match the surrounding blocks. Ahmed, the oldest and most superstitious of the masons, his face a roadmap of sun-baked wrinkles, gasped first. "By Allah, a hidden chamber!" His voice was a low rumble, laced with a tremor of awe. Karim's heart quickened. A hidden chamber was an archaeologist's dream. What secrets had been deemed so precious or so dangerous that they required such elaborate concealment? He carefully removed the last stone. A small, dark void lay beyond, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The air that puffed out carried the smell of undisturbed antiquity, a dry, papery scent, mingled with something else. A faint metallic tang, like old blood or forgotten iron. He grabbed a powerful LED lamp. The beam pierced the gloom, revealing a narrow passage leading into a smaller, almost perfectly square room. The walls were unadorned, rough-hewn stone. In the center, resting on a low stone plinth, were 2 objects. "Manuscripts," Karim breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He was the first to enter, moving with the careful, almost prayerful steps of a man approaching the sacred. The room felt colder than the rest of the mosque, a deep, pervasive chill that seemed to emanate from the very stone. The manuscripts were bound in thick, dark leather, heavily embossed with intricate, unfamiliar symbols. They didn't look like any Arabic script he knew, nor any Persian or Ottoman he'd encountered in his extensive studies. These were older, more angular, somehow more aggressive. He carefully lifted one. It was heavy, its pages made of parchment, brittle with age. The leather binding was almost rock hard. As he turned it over, dust motes danced in the lamp's beam, disturbed from their centuries-long slumber. The symbols on the cover seemed to writhe, catching the light in a way that made them appear almost alive. "What are they?" Abdul asked, his voice hushed, standing just behind Karim in the narrow passage. "I don't know," Karim admitted, his gaze fixed on the strange glyphs. "But they are very old. Older than the mosque, perhaps." Layla, the team's sharp-witted art historian, pushed past Abdul, her eyes wide with academic excitement. Karim, this is incredible. We need to document everything. We need to get these to Dr. Youssef at the university immediately. Karim nodded, but a strange unease had begun to settle in his stomach. It wasn't just the cold or the unfamiliar script. It was the feeling of the room, an oppressive quiet that seemed to absorb sound, leaving only a faint ringing in his ears. And the symbols? They weren't just decorative. They felt charged, imbued with a potent, unsettling energy. Over the next few days, the discovery sent a ripple of excitement through the academic community. Dr. Youssef, a renowned paleographer, arrived with a team, meticulously extracting the manuscripts, cataloging the chamber, and beginning the arduous task of deciphering the cryptic texts. Karim, fascinated, devoted much of his time away from the restoration to assist them. The initial findings were astounding. The texts were not religious scripture. They were, as Dr. Youssef hesitantly put it, something else entirely. They spoke of ancient cults predating Islam in the region, of hidden knowledge, of entities that dwelled in the outer darkness, and could be drawn into this world through specific rituals, and most chillingly, through the precise articulation of certain words of power. They're less like prayers and more like instructions, Dr. Youssef mused one evening, hunched over a microscope, scrutinizing a particularly ornate page. These aren't meant to connect with a benevolent deity. They're meant to command or invite. Karim felt a shiver despite the warm evening air. He found himself poring over the copies, his architect's mind trying to find order in the chaotic, unsettling symbols. He started to recognize patterns, repeating phrases. The entities were referred to variously as the veiled ones, those who slumber, and the listeners. The texts describe them as formless, ancient intelligences, capable of subtly influencing the minds of men, whispering doubts and fears, promising forgotten knowledge in exchange for something undefined, yet deeply unsettling. As the weeks turned into a month, the restoration work continued, but a subtle shift had occurred within the mosque. It began with minor, easily dismissed occurrences. Tools would disappear from where they were left, only to reappear in odd, unexpected places. The ancient oil lamps, which they still used in certain sections, flickered and dimmed without cause, sometimes even extinguishing themselves despite full reservoirs. Footsteps would echo from empty corridors. "It's the drafts, brother," Ahmed would say, crossing himself despite being in a mosque. "Or the old stones settling. Al-Nur is waking up, that is all." But Karim noticed the glint of fear in the old mason's eyes. Then came the cold. A persistent, unnatural chill seemed to seep from the very walls of the hidden chamber, extending its reach into the surrounding areas of the mosque. Even on the warmest afternoons, a pocket of glacial air would suddenly envelop a worker, making them shiver uncontrollably. "It's like someone left the freezer door open," Abdul joked nervously one day, rubbing his arms. Karim found himself spending more and more time in the mosque, even after hours. He told himself it was to oversee the last details of the restoration, but a part of him was drawn to the place, to the oppressive quiet, to the lingering scent of ozone, and something akin to dust mixed with ancient decay. He often found himself standing near the sealed chamber, a strange compulsion pulling at him, as if something behind the stone wanted his attention. The whispers began subtly. At first, Karim dismissed them as the creaking of old wood, the sigh of the wind through broken windows, or the echo of his own thoughts. But they grew more distinct, a faint, sibilant murmur, just at the edge of hearing, seeming to emanate from the shadows, from the spaces between the mihrab's carved stones. They were not in Arabic, nor in the language of the manuscripts. They were just whispers, a formless hum that tugged at the periphery of his consciousness, implanting fleeting images of ancient faces, of vast, empty spaces. One evening, Layla approached him, her usually vibrant face pale. "Karim, have you been sleeping well?" He frowned. Why do you ask? He hadn't. He'd been plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams. Dreams of vast, starless voids, of ancient, unblinking eyes watching him from impossible distances, of a voice that spoke in his mind without words, promising knowledge beyond human comprehension. Ahmed. He hasn't been himself, Layla continued, lowering her voice. He claims he sees things, shadows moving faster than they should, and he keeps talking about the words. He says we shouldn't have touched them. Karim tried to reassure her and himself. Ahmed is old, superstitious. He's probably just tired. But even as he said it, a cold knot tightened in his stomach. Ahmed's fear felt too real, too palpable. The incidents escalated. Abdul, the young apprentice, slipped from a scaffolding, breaking his arm. He swore a sudden gust of wind had pushed him, though all the windows were sealed and the air was still. Another worker, Hassan, began to stutter, his eyes darting nervously, claiming he felt an invisible presence constantly breathing down his neck. He resigned a week later, refusing to give a reason, only shaking his head and muttering about what lies beneath. Karim's scientific skepticism began to fray. He started to doubt his own perceptions. He would walk through the mosque, flashlight in hand, feeling an undeniable sense of being watched, of not being alone. He'd catch glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision, shadows that solidified for a fraction of a second into something vaguely humanoid, then vanished. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into fragments of sounds that almost formed words. He even caught himself, late one night, muttering strange, guttural syllables that felt vaguely familiar, yet he couldn't recall where he might have learned them. A sudden horrifying realization struck him. Had he been subconsciously trying to speak the words from the manuscripts? He revisited the university, seeking Dr. Youssef. The old paleographer looked weary, his usually meticulous office a mess of half-translated fragments and coffee cups. "Karim, you've come at an opportune time," Dr. Youssef said, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I've made a breakthrough, but I wish I hadn't." He pointed to a section of a particularly ornate page. "These glyphs, they're not merely words of power, Karim. They're keys to perception, keys to presence. The texts describe how these entities, the veiled ones, are always around us, always near, but veiled by our limited senses. These words, they don't summon them from afar. They unveil them. They make them perceptible, tangible, and the more one dwells on them, the more one speaks their names, even silently in the mind. The thinner the veil becomes." Karim felt a sickening lurch in his gut. "And the mosque?" "The mosque," Dr. Youssef said, his voice grim, "was built upon something ancient. The texts suggest this very site was a focal point for their cult. This isn't just an old building, it's a cage, or perhaps a prison designed to keep something in." He tapped a chilling diagram. "This particular ritual, the unveiling, speaks of a prolonged process. Not a single incantation, but a gradual erosion of the barriers. Constant thought, constant whispering, the presence of the manuscripts themselves. It draws them closer, makes them more solid. And there's a phrase, a specific sequence of sounds, they call it the breaching call. If spoken with intent, it fully tears the veil." Karim's mind reeled. He remembered his own subconscious muttering, the whispers he'd heard. He remembered Ahmed's increasing terror, Abdul's fall, Hassan's resignation. It wasn't a curse. It was a gradual, insidious unveiling. And they, in their academic curiosity and architectural diligence, had been unwittingly participating in it. He returned to the mosque that night, the weight of Dr. Youssef's words a leaden burden in his soul. The air was different, thicker, heavier, charged with an almost palpable energy. The silence was not empty. It was filled, humming with an unseen presence. As he walked through the main prayer hall, the shadows seemed deeper, swallowing the light from his lamp, twisting into grotesque, fleeting shapes. The mihrab, which once felt sacred, now radiated an unholy chill, a palpable malevolence. He needed to destroy the manuscripts, or at least reseal them, to undo the damage they had wrought. He moved towards the hidden chamber, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The whispers were no longer indistinct. They were clear now in his mind, insidious and seductive. They spoke of unimaginable power, of forbidden truths, of the emptiness of human understanding. They offered him a glimpse behind the curtain, a union with primordial forces. "Come, Karim," the whispers slithered into his thoughts. "Do not resist. We have watched you. You are close to understanding. Open the way." He fought against the influence, clutching his head, trying to clear his mind. He reached the hidden chamber. The stone block he had replaced now felt impossibly heavy, cemented by some invisible force. He pushed, he strained, but it wouldn't budge. He felt hands on his shoulders, cold and invisible, pushing him back, guiding him away. He stumbled, falling to his knees. The air around him grew frigid, and a faint, acrid smell, like burnt ozone and metallic decay, filled his nostrils. The shadows in the mihrab began to deepen, coalescing into an impossible darkness, a void that seemed to absorb all light, all sound. From within this swirling abyss, two pinpricks of light, ancient and utterly malevolent, seemed to bloom like eyes. They were not eyes in the human sense, but something far older, deeper, and full of an alien hunger. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He realized what the entity wanted, not just to be unveiled, but to manifest. And it wanted him to be the final conduit. He scrambled backward, away from the eyes, away from the crushing cold that now emanated from the mihrab. He knew he had to break its hold, to sever the connection it had established through the manuscripts and his own unwitting participation. He had to think of a way to silence the whispers, to seal the veil once more. His eyes fell upon the restoration equipment, picks, hammers, even some of the explosives they used for precise rock cutting, though these were kept in a separate, secure vault. He knew the structural weak points of the mosque better than anyone. If he couldn't reseal the chamber, he would have to bring down the entire section, destroy the focus point. He ran to the equipment storage, the whispers now a cacophony in his head, mocking his fear, taunting him with glimpses of their incomprehensible forms. The mosque itself seemed to groan, the very stones vibrating with an unseen energy. Dust rained down from the ceiling. He grabbed a heavy pickaxe, its steel head gleaming dully in his lamp's beam. He remembered a specific structural pillar near the mihrab, a stress point that, if compromised, would bring down the entire rear section of the mosque, including the hidden chamber. It was a desperate, destructive act, but the alternative was far worse. As he returned, the entity's presence was overwhelming. The air was so thick he felt like he was swimming through treacle. The mihrab's abyss had widened, the two unblinking pinprick eyes now larger, clearer, burning with an unholy light. He could almost discern tendrils of shadow reaching out, clawing at the air, testing the thinness of the veil. "Stop, Karim. You are ours. Join us. We will show you everything." The whispers were a roar in his skull, trying to paralyze him, to break his will. He could feel it probing his mind, searching for weaknesses, preying on his deepest fears. He saw images of his family, of everything he loved, consumed by the same cold, starless void. He closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and swung the pickaxe. It connected with the ancient pillar with a dull thud. A shower of dust and stone fragments erupted. He swung again and again, ignoring the blinding pain in his shoulders, the scream of the whispers, the chilling laughter that seemed to echo from the void. The pillar began to crack. A fissure snaked up its length. The ground beneath his feet trembled. The entity's presence flared, a desperate surge of power. The air turned agonizingly cold, and he felt invisible hands tearing at his clothes, raking his skin, trying to pull him into the abyss. He fought back with a primal scream, fueled by terror and a desperate will to survive, to protect. With a final, desperate heave, he brought the pickaxe down with all his remaining strength. The pillar groaned, then shattered, crumbling into a cascade of ancient stone. The entire section of the mihrab gave way with a deafening roar, a symphony of collapsing masonry, splintering wood, and grinding stone. Dust exploded outwards, blinding him. He felt himself thrown backward by the force of the collapse, landing hard on the cold stone floor. Silence. Not the oppressive silence of the entity, but the profound, echoing silence of destruction. The dust slowly settled, revealing a gaping hole where the mihrab and the hidden chamber had once stood. Rubble, ancient and new, lay piled high, a tomb for whatever secrets had been buried beneath. Karim lay there, gasping, every muscle screaming in protest. His body ached, his head throbbed, but the whispers were gone. The suffocating presence had receded. The cold, while still lingering, was no longer the active, malevolent chill of the entity, but the natural cold of an exposed, ruined building. He pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the devastation. It was done. The mosque was damaged, perhaps beyond repair, but the threat, he hoped, was gone. The veil, for now, was resealed. The official inquiry was a nightmare. Structural failure, they concluded, due to unforeseen weaknesses in the ancient stone, exacerbated by the restoration work. Karim, suffering from severe concussion and emotional trauma, could only nod, offering vague, non-committal answers. He couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe him? He was reassigned, then took an indefinite leave of absence. The Al-Nur Mosque project was abandoned, the site sealed off, deemed too dangerous and costly to continue. Years passed. Karim became a recluse, working on small, isolated architectural projects, far from ancient sites or grand restorations. He never returned to a mosque. He never looked at old buildings the same way. The quiet hum of empty rooms sometimes sent shivers down his spine. The nightmares, while less frequent, still came. Dreams of starless voids, of unblinking eyes, of words whispered in a language that warped the mind. He sometimes caught himself, in the lonely hours of the night, almost articulating a syllable, a sound that felt both familiar and utterly alien. A memory, perhaps, or a fragment of the entity that had burrowed deep into his subconscious. He knew. He carried the knowledge within him, a chilling burden. He had glimpsed behind the veil, understood the true nature of the ancient lurking horror that awaited. He often wondered if he had truly stopped it, or merely bought humanity a little more time. Sometimes, in the deepest silence of his apartment, he could still almost hear them, faint as a moth's wings against glass, the whispers, just at the edge of hearing, always promising, always waiting. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the veil was never truly impenetrable. It was only ever, always waiting to be thinned again.